Rain clawed at the earth like an angry hand. Lightning tore across the Texas sky, splitting the horizon into jagged flashes of fire. The ground was mud, thick and heavy, sucking at every desperate movement. A young woman was on her knees in that storm, her hands blistered and bleeding as she clawed at the shallow grave before her. She did not pause. She did not flinch. Each shovelful of mud she ripped free felt like it weighed her soul down further. The storm bellowed above her, but she kept digging, because she had seen something no sane person would ignore. A breath, a twitch, a whisper of life from a body that the earth was already swallowing. Her name was Clara Dawson, 23, with a face too worn for her age, eyes hollowed by grief. Her dress clung to her, soaked and heavy, but she hardly noticed. Only months ago, she'd buried her own family, her parents, her younger brother, taken by fever, then by the raids that swept across the frontier like wildfire. She had promised herself she'd never dig another grave. And yet here she was, dragging a half-dead stranger out of the dirt, fighting mud and storm as if clawing against death itself. The body beneath her hands was no lifeless corpse. His chest heaved shallowly, blood darkening his shirt. He had been shot, more than once, and dumped like carrion. Whoever had done it left him to rot, certain he wouldn't rise again. Clara pressed her hand against his ribs, searching desperately for rhythm. It was faint, too faint. She swallowed a cry, hooked her arms beneath him, and pulled with everything she had. The storm punished her for it. The wind shoved her sideways, and her foot sank deep into mud. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd collapse right there, that the weight of the man would crush the last ounce of what she had left. But she lifted again. Step by dragging step, she pulled him free of the grave, every muscle screaming. Her lungs burned. The rain blinded her, but her will kept driving her forward. By the time she reached her shelter, a crude dugout against a ridge wall, patched with bark and hides, she was trembling so badly she nearly dropped him. Inside, a single ember still glowed in her hearth. She fed it quickly, breath shaky, and flames rose, casting the room in a trembling glow. She laid him out, hands trembling as she checked his wounds. Bullets had ripped his shoulder inside. The bleeding had slowed, but infection was already a threat. Her mind screamed at her to leave him. She barely had food for herself. To nurse a dying man, worse, a stranger, was madness. But then, hadn't she herself once begged for someone to help her when she lay fevered in her father's cabin, her brother too weak to fetch water? No one came, and they had all died. She would not let that story repeat. Clara boiled water, tore strips from her only spare dress, and pressed them to his wounds. He didn't stir. His skin burned with fever, though his lips were cold. She forced drops of water into his mouth, whispered nonsense to keep herself from collapsing, and prayed he'd cling to life long enough for morning to break. Outside, the storm carried the cries of wolves. The sound slithered through the cracks in the dugout, sharp and hungry. She fed the fire higher, knowing while they smelled blood. She gripped her father's old rifle close to her chest, heart hammering as the shadows shifted. The eyes of beasts gleamed just beyond the firelight, but none dared cross it. For now, hours stretched like years. Clara's eyelids drooped, but she never truly slept. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the whisper of wind, the low growl of a wolf, jerked her awake. She checked his breathing again and again. Weak, ragged, but still there. Against all reason, he clung to life. When dawn finally seeped gray into the horizon, Clara nearly wept with relief. The storm had passed. The wolves had gone silent. The fire had burned low, but enough heat lingered to keep death at bay. She turned to check on him once more, just in time to see his eyes open. They were dark, fierce, and full of suspicion. His gaze fixed on her, sharp as a blade, and in that moment she knew. He wasn't just some settler, some drifter who had been ambushed. His face, the markings at his temple, the braids of his dark hair, they revealed what he was. Comanche, and she had just saved a man the frontier called its enemy. His eyes followed her every move, unblinking, like a wolf cornered and unsure if it should strike or flee. Clara froze, hands still hovering over the bandages she had tied. For a long, breathless moment, the tiny dugout seemed to shrink around them. The fire popped, shadows trembled on the mud walls, and the man's gaze hardened with something close to defiance. When she reached for the pot of water cooling by the fire, he jerked his arm back, his lips pressed thin. His voice rasped low, but firm, the English broken yet sharp. "No." She hesitated, water dripping from her fingers. "You'll die if you don't drink," she whispered. The man's stare deepened, as though he were measuring her, testing whether this pale, mud-streaked girl was danger or salvation. Then, with the stubborn pride of a man who'd survived too much already, he turned his head away. The silence pressed heavy. Clara felt her throat tighten. He didn't trust her. Of course he didn't. She was a settler. He was Comanche. Out here on the edge of the frontier, they were taught to see each other as little more than enemies. But beneath the dirt and fever, she saw something else. A fighter, a survivor. And she remembered how it felt to lie helpless, begging for a hand that never came. "Stubborn fool," she muttered, more to herself than to him. She set the water down, forcing her voice steady. "Fine, die then, but I won't let you make me a grave digger twice." He blinked, something flickering in his expression. Was it confusion? Amusement? He didn't answer. The days that followed stretched like a test of endurance. Clara foraged what little she could. Rabbits too small to fill the belly, bitter roots that made her gag. Her father's rifle was old, the powder damp from the storm, and every shot felt like a gamble she could not afford to lose. She stitched hides over the dugout cracks to keep the wind out, and every night she sat by the fire, listening to his shallow breathing. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with thanks, not even curiosity, but with suspicion, as though every moment he stayed alive in her shelter was another debt he refused to owe. Yet little by little, cracks formed in his wall of silence. When she stumbled back one evening with a rabbit clutched in her hand, mud smeared across her dress, he followed her movements with sharp eyes. She skinned it clumsily, burning the meat, the smell foul in the close air. She pushed the half-charred mess aside, near tears, and whispered, "I can't even feed us." That night, he stirred. With a pained grunt, he reached for a stick, drew symbols in the dirt, lines like snares, marks like tracks. He tapped the crude drawing with his finger, then pointed at her. A lesson. The next morning, Clara set her traps where he'd shown her. She returned hours later with 2 rabbits. Small victories, but enough to keep them breathing. When she laid the animals down, she saw his lips twitch, the closest thing to approval she had seen yet. Days blurred into weeks. The fever broke, though his wounds kept him weak. He said little, only single words in halting English, but his silence was not empty. He watched, he taught, in the smallest gestures. He corrected her grip when she tried cutting bark for kindling, his hand briefly closing over hers before he pulled back as if burnt. And slowly, impossibly, Clara began to feel less alone. But the world beyond their fire had not forgotten them. It was late afternoon when the sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Clara's heart stopped. She peeked through a crack in the dugout wall. 3 men rode into the clearing, dust and grit on their coats, rifles slung across their saddles. Bandits. Their leader, a scar-faced man with a crooked grin, shouted, "You seen him? That wounded Indian? Worth $50 if he's dead, more if he's alive." Clara's blood turned to ice. $50 for him. The men dismounted, prowling the clearing, their boots crunching near her door. She moved fast, panic rising. She dragged the weak Comanche man toward the floorboards she had once hidden food beneath. His body was heavy, his groan faint, but she forced him down, covering him with sacks and hides. The door burst open. One bandit shoved inside, eyes sweeping the dim room. His gaze landed on her. "Girl, you alone out here?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. She clutched the rifle, lowering it like she was merely guarding her hearth. "Ain't seen anyone. Just me." The man sniffed the air, scowling. His eyes drifted toward the hides on the floor. Clara forced herself to smile. You're welcome to search, but I've got nothing worth stealing. The bandit took a step forward, then another. Her grip tightened on the rifle. She could hear the faint, ragged breath beneath the floorboards. Another voice called from outside, impatient. Leave her. Ain't worth it. The man sneered, spat on the dirt, and finally turned. The door slammed shut behind him. Their hoofbeats thundered away. Only when the sound faded did Clara collapse to her knees, shaking. She tore the sacks aside, pulling the man up. His dark eyes locked on hers, wide and unblinking. For the first time, his hand rose, weak, trembling, and gripped her wrist. Not to push her away, but to hold. Why? His voice was hoarse, ragged, but the word was clear. Clara swallowed hard. She thought of her family, the grave she had dug with her own hands, the cold silence of waiting for someone who never came. Her throat burned as she whispered, "Because no one dug me out when I was dying." For a long time, he said nothing, but his hand did not let go. The forest whispered in ways Clara had never noticed before. Twigs snapped under deer hooves. Wind shifted through leaves like warning sighs, and every patch of mud told a story if one knew how to read it. She wouldn't have known any of this on her own, but the man, Tahu, was teaching her. It wasn't with words, not often. His English was jagged, broken, and her tongue stumbled clumsily over the few Comanche sounds she tried to mimic. Instead, he showed her. When she set a snare too loose, he tightened the cord with quick fingers and handed it back without a word. When she stepped heavy on a trail, he tapped the ground, then lifted his foot to show her how to walk with silence. Sometimes she failed, sometimes she succeeded, and sometimes his eyes glimmered with something that might have been amusement. One morning by the river, Clara crouched beside him as he ran his fingers across the mud. "Dear," he said simply, pointing to faint imprints she would have sworn were nothing but smudges. She leaned closer, tracing the marks, marveling that he could see life where she saw only dirt. And though his wounds healed slowly, his presence grew stronger. He carried himself like the wilderness itself, scarred, unbroken, eternal. Still, the silence between them held weight. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and the fire cracked low, Clara found herself staring into the flames, thoughts spiraling into places she had locked away. The smoke reminded her of home, her father's voice, her brother's laughter, the sharp coughs that turned to silence in the cabin where they died. She hugged her knees, her throat aching. "I think," her voice broke. She tried again. "I think everyone I touch dies." Tahu's head turned. In the dim glow, his gaze was steady, unreadable. She pressed on, words tumbling out like a wound reopening. "I couldn't save them. My family. Fever came, and I prayed, I begged, but nothing worked. And when the raids came, I hid. I hid while neighbors burned. I hear them still, every night." She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. "And now you'll die too because of me. It always ends that way." For a long time, he said nothing. Then, with a slow movement, he pulled back the fabric at his side, revealing an old scar carved deep across his ribs. His voice was low, gravelly. "They buried me once." Her breath caught. He touched the scar, then curled his fingers like claws, dragging them upward. "I dig out. Alone." He paused, eyes meeting hers. "You dig me now. Not alone." The fire flickered between them. For the first time, Clara felt something loosen inside her, a thread of her grief, unraveling in the face of his own survival. Their fragile bond deepened in days that followed. He showed her which plants healed and which poisoned. She mended his bandages with hands steadier than before. Sometimes they sat in silence, the quiet no longer suffocating but almost companionable. But peace never held long on the frontier. The bandits returned. It was late afternoon when the warning came, a crow scattering from the tree-line, the faint thunder of hooves. Clara's heart lurched. Tahu rose stiffly, his movements still limited by wounds, but his eyes sharp as ever. He motioned quickly, pointing toward the ridge. "Go," he hissed. "No," she whispered back, gripping the rifle. The first shot cracked through the forest, splintering bark inches from her head. Horses burst through the underbrush, bandits snarling, guns raised. Clara fired instinctively, the recoil jarring her shoulder, smoke stinging her eyes. The shot went wide. "Run!" Tahu growled, grabbing her arm. They bolted, branches whipping at their faces, the ground uneven beneath their feet. Bullets tore through leaves, hooves thundered closer. Clara stumbled, breath ragged, but Tahu yanked her up, dragging her onward. The forest became a blur of green and shadow, danger closing in from all sides. Another shot cracked. Bark exploded near her head. She bit back a scream, lungs burning. Behind them, voices roared. "Don't let him get away." Clara's legs screamed for rest, but adrenaline drove her faster. The ridge loomed ahead, sharp and steep, the earth dropping into a canyon below. No way forward, no way back. They skidded to a halt at the cliff's edge, dust and pebbles scattering into the yawning drop. The bandits closed in, grinning, rifles leveled. Clara's chest heaved, her mind reeling with terror. Tahu's hand found hers. His palm was rough, blood-stained but steady. His eyes burned with fire, not fear. He leaned close, his voice low but fierce. Together, Clara swallowed hard, gripping the rifle until her knuckles whitened. The bandits shouted, raising their guns. Wind tore at her hair, carrying the smell of powder and blood. And then, with no other choice, they braced for the fight. The canyon air hung thick with dust and gunpowder. Clara's lungs burned as she pressed her back to the jagged ridge wall, rifle shaking in her hands. Across the narrow clearing, the bandits spread out, eyes glinting with hunger and cruelty. Their leader, scar-faced and grinning, called out over the echoing stone. "Thought you could hide him, girl. He's worth more than your life. Hand him over, and maybe we'll let you keep breathing." Tahu stood tall beside her, blood staining his shirt, body weak but eyes alive with fire. He said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Clara's grip tightened. She had never been a fighter. She'd grown up tending fires, not raising rifles. But now there was no one else. And if she failed, everything she had clawed from despair would be lost. The first shot split the air. Stone shattered near her head, shards biting her cheek. She ducked, heart hammering. Tahu grabbed her arm, pulling her into cover. He leveled his bow, carved and scarred but deadly. With a single draw, he loosed. The arrow screamed through the canyon and buried itself in a bandit's chest. The man toppled from his saddle, crashing into the dust. "Shoot!" Tahu barked. Clara rose. Her rifle roared. One bandit staggered back, arm torn by lead. Rage flared in his eyes. He charged, pistol drawn, teeth bared. Clara fumbled to reload, fingers clumsy with sweat. The man was almost on her when Tahu lunged, slamming into him. They tumbled, fists in fury. The scar-faced leader advanced, rifle steady, eyes locked on Clara. She scrambled back, heart choking her throat. Her weapon wasn't ready. "No time." He sneered. Then she saw the stone at her feet. Clara snatched it up, hurled it with every ounce of strength left in her. It cracked against his temple. He cursed, staggering. That heartbeat of hesitation was all she needed. The rifle snapped into place. She fired. The shot echoed through the canyon. The leader jerked, blood spraying as he crumpled into the dust. The last two bandits froze. Their leader gone, fear clouded their eyes. They exchanged one glance, then bolted for the tree-lean, hooves thundering as they vanished into the distance. Silence fell. Clara lowered the rifle, trembling so hard she could barely stand. Her ears rang with the roar of her shot. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Tahu rose slowly, bruised and bloodied, but standing tall. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, he nodded, not in suspicion, not in grudging acknowledgement, but in respect. But her triumph came with cost. A searing pain spread through Clara's side. She looked down and saw crimson blooming across her dress. One of the bullets had found her after all. Her legs buckled. Tahu caught her before she hit the ground. His voice was rough, urgent, but steady. "Stay. Live." Her vision blurred, but she clung to the sound of his words as darkness tugged at her. When she woke again, It was to warmth and voices not her own. The scent of smoke and hides filled the air. She blinked and found herself in a great lodge, firelight flickering across painted walls. Around her, Comanche men and women stood watching. At her side, Tahu knelt, eyes dark with concern. A tall figure stepped forward, the Comanche leader, Tahu's uncle. His presence was commanding, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. He studied Clara in silence, then looked to Tahu, who spoke in their language, voice low and reverent. The elder's expression softened. He turned back to Clara and, with a single motion of his hand, gave an order. Moments later, young warriors led in a herd of cattle, dozens upon dozens, their hooves rumbling like thunder. 85 in all, a fortune beyond imagining for a lone woman on the frontier. This, the elder said in heavy English, for you, for saving him, for honor. Clara's throat closed. Tears stung her eyes. She had expected nothing, perhaps only suspicion, perhaps even punishment for meddling in their world. But instead, she was given more than she had ever dreamed. Not the cows themselves, but what they meant: respect, recognition, life. She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. I don't deserve this. Tahu's gaze burned steady. You dig me from death. Now life digs you. The herd shifted restlessly outside, the air filled with their low calls. For Clara, it felt like the sound of a future she had never thought possible. When she rose to leave, healed but still scarred, the elder offered her the herd once more. She accepted, not for wealth, but as proof she could begin again. Not as the broken girl who had once dug graves in the rain, but as a woman reborn by fire, blood, and trust. Her last sight of Tahu was at the edge of the village, his figure tall and unyielding, his eyes holding a weight of unspoken words. She wanted to stay, but she knew her path was elsewhere. With the herd behind her, Clara Dawson walked into the horizon. The land was harsh, the future uncertain, but for the first time, she carried more than grief. She carried strength, hard-won and enduring. And she carried the memory of a bond born in mud, blood, and survival, a bond that had changed her forever. Narrator's voice closed the tale like a whisper carried by the wind. From a grave clawed open in a storm, to a gift that could buy an empire, Clara's story is not just of survival, but the strange kinship forged on the edge of death. A reminder that in the darkest of nights, one act of defiance can spark a new dawn. If her tale gripped your heart, ride with us again. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let Frontier Tales keep the fire burning. The screen faded to black.